webinar series. I'm James Akulo, the Director of System Planning at ESIG, and we're a member-based nonprofit organization committed to providing our members with objective information, resources, and networking opportunities in support of the energy transition. We do this through a number of workshops, tutorials, webinars, blogs, working groups, task force activities, and producing technical resource materials. ESIG also serves in a leadership role with the Global Power System Transformation Consortium, GPST, whose mission is to bring together key actors to catalyze a rapid, clean energy transition at unprecedented scope and speed. ESIG leads one of the 5 pillars, which deals with the research agenda for the system operators. More information on GPST can be found at www.globalpst.org. I'll mention that our next in-person workshop will be next week in Tucson, beginning March 25th, and I sincerely hope that you're able to join us. More information can be found on our website, esig.energy under events. I'll remind you that our workshops and our webinars are open to everyone, so please feel free to register anytime at the ESIG website. Now, if you're new to ESIG, I strongly encourage you to follow up with us if you like what you hear today, next week, through our webinars, through our reports, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. You can find us on the web, again at www.esig.energy, and you can look us up on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Before we jump in, let's go over a few logistics. So please note that participant lines have been muted during the webinar, and that will limit unnecessary distractions. For the question and answer portion, we'll be using the Slido platform at slido.com, slido.com. So please go to slido.com and enter ESIG19 as the event code. That is ESIG19 as the event code. The instructions are also at the bottom of the screen. In addition, you'll see a thumbs up button next to the questions, and this allows you to cast a vote. It just helps raise different questions up in the ladder, and we'll start by addressing those. And so we plan to reserve 10-15 minutes for Q&A at the end of the session. In addition, an email link will be provided once the video has been posted. We also plan to provide short responses to any questions that might go unanswered during the webinar here. So on to our topic. Our topic today is Interregional Transmission System Planning with HVDC. And as the title suggests, our speaker will discuss emerging topics in transmission planning related to 1, the expansion of interregional transmission, and 2, modern HVDC technology as a means to do that expansion. Increasingly, the value of interregional transmission is being highlighted. However, at least in the US, there continues to be limited movement in the planning for, identifying of, and investing in the type of transmission that connects different regions. So this webinar will look at the current regional planning processes and emphasize the difficulties and inefficiencies in the current US planning processes. And we'll go further and suggest ways to improve and expand interregional transmission. And one of the tools that we have to transform the interregional transmission landscape is HVDC, and our speaker will discuss the special features of modern HVDC technologies, the operational and market benefits of the technology, and importantly, how it can be integrated into transmission planning. Our speaker today is Johannes Pfeifenberger, who's a principal of the Brattle group, and in many ways doesn't need much of an introduction because he's very well known to all of us who are involved in electricity markets, transmission planning, regulation, and finance. He has been around for over 25 years in the industry, where he has specialized in improving power market design and grid investment, integration of renewable generation, storage resources, and the impact of regulatory and legislative actions in the context of evolving market conditions. And we're very excited to have Johannes with us today. And we're always challenged, educated, and inspired by what he has to say. And once again, please use Slido with the event code ESIG19 for any of your questions. Thank you so much for joining us, and let's get started here. I'll turn it over to you, Johannes.
Thank you, James. I have a problem with my remote control. I'm not quite sure how to switch my video on, but can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear, yes.
Well, I think it has to do, oh, there it is. Well, thank you for joining us on this beautiful afternoon. If your afternoon isn't beautiful yet, it will be after the end of this presentation because we have a lot of very interesting topics to talk about. We really have two topics. One is interregional planning, the challenges and needs, and the second one is HVDC. And as we will see, there's a big overlap because a lot of interregional transmission can be uniquely addressed with HVDC technology, even though obviously there's interregional transmission without HVDC, and there's HVDC transmission that's not just interregional. But a lot of what I'm talking about today is based on a report that we did last fall, the operational market benefits of HVDC to system operators, where we really go into a lot of detail about what the technology can do, the practical experience that exists, myths that exist as well that we dispel through over 20 case studies and so on. So let's dive right into what is interregional planning? Well, interregional planning is part, or is supposed to be part of the planning process that we use here in the US and North America in general. But the US grid planning process is really very siloed, and understanding how interregional transmission fits into this process is very important, because what you see here on top is this is sort of the priority order with which transmission is being planned. So if the local projects, generation interconnection projects, long-term transmission service projects, are sort of those grid upgrades are planned before regional projects are being planned. But those reliability projects in those top four boxes are really accounting for about 90% of all transmission investments. This is pure reliability planning. It does not involve any assessment of cost savings or economic benefits. It's really just identifying reliability needs and finding solutions to address those particular needs. Planning for economic and public policy projects like congestion relief, making lower cost resources accessible, is probably approving only 10% or less of all the transmission investments we see in the US. And we're talking about $25 billion in annual transmission investments that we are making or have been making on an annual basis for the last 5 to 10 years. And then at the very end, after all those other needs are being addressed, there is a theoretical need for interregional transmission. But we don't really have interregional transmission planning processes. There are some coordination processes on the regional planners' books, but they're not really functional. So we really haven't planned a lot of interregional transmission. There's some notable exceptions, like in the West, but for the most part, not much interregional transmission has been planned by the system operators. When we ask why that is the case, we actually did a survey a couple of years ago of the barrier to interregional transmission. And it's not one thing. It's not permitting. It's not the planning tools. It's not just leadership or public policy requirements. It's really all of the above. What we found was sort of almost a dozen distinct barriers to interregional transmission that we grouped into three categories. One is leadership, alignment, and understanding. There's often insufficient leadership from the system planners, the states. There's limited understanding of how transmission plays a role in reducing customer costs and creating a reliable grid. But we also have planning analyses that are just too narrowly focused on each region or local needs. And if you build all the local and regional projects before you look at interregional solutions, you almost preempted lower cost interregional solutions because all the regional needs are being dealt with by the individual ISOs. And of course, there are big constraints. Siting permitting is a challenge, of course. And sometimes the planning processes in the ISO's tariffs are just too prescriptive that the planning process that has been sketched out just isn't working, at least not for interregional transmission. I encourage you to go to this link here and look behind what's behind these 11 barriers. But at the same time that it's almost impossible to approve interregional transmission through the planning processes, we also see a lot of documentation like this from the national labs on the large value that exists for interregional transmission of power, particularly during challenging years like 2022, where gas prices are high and you have major cold snaps and heat waves to deal with. This, of course, is based on current data, and what's shown on this chart is the value per 1,000 megawatts of interregional transmission based on the market price differences between these various dots on that map. And last year, DOE has issued its National Transmission Needs Study, where they document and summarize results from half a dozen national studies with many scenarios and sensitivities. And they have looked at all these studies and say the studies explore sort of a status quo scenario with moderate load growth and moderate shares of clean energy. Some of the studies look at moderate load growth, but very high share of clean energy, like 90+%. And some of the scenarios are high load growth, say electrification, and high clean energy shares. And then these studies that have been reviewed are really optimization studies. So when they determine a need, it is really the most cost-effective combination of generation and transmission that yields the or that can be used to supply future loads. And when we look at that, we see that we would need a lot of interregional transmission to achieve cost-effective outcomes. In the status quo, it might be a 25 to 30% increase over the next decade or so. So we'd be adding about 30 gigawatts of interregional transfer capability just based on the status quo, the moderate scenarios. If we want to get to high renewable shares, as many regions have planned or at least have goals to reach, we are quickly getting into 30% to doubling the existing transfer capability. And if high electrification is on top of that, we might need the sort of doubling or tripling of transfer capability if we wanted to achieve the electricity supply and clean energy transition in a most cost-effective way. If we ask ourselves where those transfer capabilities are needed, we see a lot would be necessary between the sort of mid-Atlantic and Midwest region, Midwestern plains. This is where low-cost clean energy resources are, basically getting low-cost clean energy resources to loads and diversifying intermittency over a larger regional footprint to achieve more reliable outcomes at lower total costs. So while there is a lot of need, how do we actually get to that transmission? These are all planning studies. The studies are done. nothing is really happening other than the information value. So they're not creating an actual need for approving projects. None of the studies reviewed in the DOE National Transmission Needs Study, nor the National Transmission Needs Study itself, results in approved projects. So how can we approve interregional projects through the planning processes? And we really have 4 paths available to us. It's complicated, but I'm going to get you through that very quickly. The easiest way would be to just say, let's have minimum interregional transfer requirements. People have been talking about this. NERC is studying it. Europe has done that. Europe has a target that each country's market is interconnected with the neighboring markets with a capability that's at least 15% of the installed generation. We're looking at this here in the US. Whether we get any requirement is a question, of course. If we don't have a minimum requirement, we could do multi-regional planning, either through a federal planning authority or sort of a new sort of multi-regional authority, as if the EIPC effort that we initiated a decade ago could actually approve transmission projects. That is being done in Europe as well, where ENTSO-E, which is the European Organization of Transmission System Operators, they actually have a planning process that can approve projects for moving forward under their 10-year network development plan. We don't have this in the US. So if we don't have a planning authority that can plan and approve interregional projects, we're really left to improve joint RTO planning. Most of the RTOs have planning processes where they coordinate already. There's no requirement to actually have a plan come out of that. Some of the ISOs have planning processes under which they could approve certain types of projects, but those are very narrow and not much has come out of those. But in addition to have both RTOs work together to develop a joint plan, it is also possible to have each RTO look beyond its own boundaries to identify interregional solutions within each regional planning process. Basically, it says here's a need, but an interregional project would actually be a better solution to the need that we see, and that interregional solution could then be brought to the neighboring RTO and say, hey, we are seeing this opportunity, shouldn't we do that? And then to implement all of this, of course, the neighboring regions would have to agree on cost allocations. We've mapped this out and made some recommendations on cost allocations in this roadmap to improve interregional transmission planning that this is taken from. So how does that all relate to HVDC? Well, most of the North American interregional transmission projects that are being proposed or have been proposed actually are HVDC lines, and you see them as the red lines on this map. The blue lines are the existing HVDC lines, but you see there are a lot of interregional lines that are being proposed. Now, these projects are being proposed by independent developers, merchant developers, offshore wind developers on the coast, but they're not being planned by system operators. But how does HVDC fit into the interregional picture? HVDC brings certain advantages. It is perhaps uniquely suited for interregional transmission because it can combine high capacity, long distance power transfers. It's very efficient with right-of-way, including undergrounding and submarine applications. It has controllable power flows, which can be very attractive, as we'll talk soon, and it can bridge seams between synchronous and asynchronous regions. It can also be used to connect weak grids, so a lot of resources in weak grids that otherwise would be hard to manage. And it has capabilities that allow us to supply grid services from HVDC technology. So a little bit of background on HVDC technology, and because it has evolved dramatically over the last 5 to 10 years. It now offers high capacity, longer distance, lower loss transmission on a smaller footprint, and the development of voltage source converters, or VSC technology, has dramatically improved the capability of those HVDC lines, as we'll be discussing in the next slides. And those VSC-based capabilities can be used to enhance the existing grid, to do things on the existing grid that otherwise would require synchronous condensers and stabilizers and all kinds of other conventional technologies. We have about 50 gigawatts of VSC-based HVDC transmission projects in operations. So while VSC was new technology 10 years ago, it no longer is. There's a lot of operational experience. And we have about 130 gigawatts already planned under development, and much more than that projected. Yet North America accounts for only 3% of VSC systems. So in the US and in North America, we are far behind Europe and China and other places in using this technology for good reasons, as you might see in the next slides. But all the merchant lines and all the proposed systems would mean that if those get built, the US would account for about 30% of the currently planned proposed VSC systems worldwide. US system operators, other than CalISO and New York, are generally less familiar with HVDC and how the new HVDC technology can benefit their grid. But we can learn a lot from overseas experience, though there are quite a few barriers related to the planning processes, the supply chain, operational, regulatory, and so on. We'll talk about the planning challenges today, but these other barriers are really important to understand, and our report from the fall is really laying out that in greater detail. So one thing is clear: HVDC technology can be expensive, but it also offers unique advantages and a broader set of capabilities than most AC solutions. But how do we choose between HVDC solutions and AC grid technology when we plan the transmission system? And that really requires that we recognize that HVDC transmission technology is more than increasing transfer capability between point A and point B. It can do many more things than that. So it's really comparing a Swiss Army knife with a pocket knife. Maybe we don't want to pay for the extra capability of the Swiss Army knife, but if we think we might want to open a bottle of wine at some point in the future, we might want to pay extra to get the Swiss Army knife, so we don't need to buy our own bottle opener and incur separate expense. Or maybe we'll just use the can opener or the screwdriver or whatever you have. But what it means for transmission planning is that to make an informed decision on HVDC, we need to look at it from a multi-value transmission planning mindset. This is not addressing a simple need to increase transfer capability between A and B. It's really a question of whether the added capabilities have value and how we value this in the transmission planning process. This means we need to understand what HVDC can do and what the use cases are where these benefits are most compelling. We already talked that HVDC is very cost-effective for long-distance bulk transport, but we also know that this optimal use of right-of-way has advantages of having a smaller footprint, being able to use undergrounding and submarine applications, It's very controllable at the millisecond level, and it can accomplish asynchronous connections. So within those advantages, we see back-to-back converters. We've been using them for asynchronous connections between the Western and Eastern grid in US already. It's often attractive for city infeeds where right-of-way is at a premium. Water crossing, undergrounding, transmission reinforcements within balancing areas when right-of-way is challenging. When the controllability allows us to reinforce transfers between balancing areas, whether asynchronous or not, but it also allows us to supply weak parts of the grid or connect weak parts of the grid, such as Gentiles from high renewable areas that don't have much of an established grid, including offshore applications, of course. And then we can reinforce the AC grid through an overlay with HVDC technology. So we talked about capabilities. There's the different HVDC technologies. The older LLC converters, they have certain advantages, and the newer VSC converters, almost all new HVDC lines being planned worldwide, or at least in Europe, are using VSC for its capabilities. But both of these technologies can provide real power control and reactive power control as basic transmission functions. They can also support the grid through synthetic inertia if combined with resources from a neighboring system or generation. They can regulate frequency between systems, are very good at ramping and providing reserves if there are sort of reserve sharing agreements. They can be programmed to react like an AC line with AC line emulation, or track external resources for power control. They can dampen power oscillations. They can be great tool to address contingency situations. And then, of course, for reliability operations, such as intertie optimizations and so on. But once we go to VSC capabilities, we also see we can use HVDC to connect to weak and islanded grid operations. We can do dynamic voltage control and reactive dynamic power control. We can even use VSC capabilities to do AC phase balancing and AC harmonics filtering. We can use them for black start and system restoration. And they're very fast. They can frequently and rapidly reverse power flows to support the interconnected grids. Many of these capabilities are recognized as reliability challenges in the future. That doesn't necessarily mean that every line will be used to provide all of these capabilities, but we need to be aware of these capabilities in specific applications. So we have a lot of experience with those capabilities, in fact, for like frequency support and emergency energy applications. The Nemo link between Belgium and the UK is a great case study. If we have overhead line, it's shown that we can do auto reclosure for overhead line fault clearing and automatic bi to monopole changes. These are capabilities that are not theoretical and that are very important. We have HVDC runback schemes to prevent overloading of AC lines during contingency situations that are being used in several places, not just this example here. We can use AC line to address DC line to address AC stability constraints and improve system transfer capabilities. Often we have stability constraints on the AC system. If we can use HVDC to address the stability constraint, we can not only add the HVDC capability to the system, but we can actually increase the capability of the underlying AC system. Or if we don't want to control the HVDC line, we can tell the HVDC line to behave like an AC line. So it has the same response to power flows and contingencies. Power oscillation dampening can be very powerful in certain grid applications. And black start and system restoration service. This is just one line that is being used for that, but I want to point out that in the UK, much of the future black start capability in the UK will be provided by HVDC lines to neighboring systems in Europe. And we can convert AC lines to HVDC, as is being done in Germany, for example. And triple the transfer capability of the existing AC line by doing so. From a planning perspective, from a reliability perspective and market efficiency perspective, there's no real difference between planning for HVDC as there is for planning for regular AC lines. But of course, the technology has its own capabilities. So as we get deeper into it, transient stability, electromagnetic behavior, real-time behavior, there's a lot of testing and specifying and interconnection studies that need to be done. My focus is more on the economic planning side. And there it's really important to understand the added benefits and avoided costs that HVDC can facilitate if applied to under the right circumstances. One of the benefits is that in addition to just transferring power between point A and point B, it is basically a phase shifter. You can control power flows. You can use the HVDC line to control power flows on the underlying AC grid and relieve congestion on the AC grid through that kind of flow control. We can dynamically control voltage from each converter stations independent of the real power flows. Even if the line is out, we can provide reactive power control through the converter stations. We can reduce transfer losses under the right circumstances, and we can actually reduce the AC grid losses by how we control power flow on the DC line. If we need to underground part of the right-of-way, it's much easier and lower cost to do with a DC line. And then from a contingency operation, you have much more controllability. If there's a 2 gigawatt bipole line and one of the wires goes out, say due to a lightning strike, you only lose half of the capability of the line. But if you have 1,500 megawatts flowing on a 2 gigawatt line, you can control the outage such that you only lose 500 megawatts by shifting the remaining flow on the intact pole. So you have much more control for contingency management to more fully utilize the capability. And then there's sort of stability and the kind of grid forming, synthetic inertia, black start restoration, and so on. If you compare the HVDC DC solution with, say, a regular AC solution, as MISO has done when they compared 765 kV AC lines with HVDC lines, they found that as the my lines increase, the cost of the AC solution increases while the cost of the DC solution decreases, as you see with this line here. This is just looking at this as if nothing more is needed but to transfer increase transfer capability between point A and point B. But if any of the values that you see on the left here are valuable, then that basically reduces the net cost of the line in ways that I can show you how to quantify that. So it gets to a point where the DC solution becomes more cost effective relative to the AC solutions. There will still be many places where DC is just not the right application, but this is one way to think about this. So how do you quantify that, those other values that would reduce the net cost of the DC solution? The value of power flow and market optimization can be estimated with nodal production costs model, as long as you confirm that the models can actually optimize HVDC lines. Some of the models are not very good at that, but if you can control the HVDC line to reduce congestion on the underlying AC grid, that's a good way to calculate that value, and the present value of those savings can be subtracted from the installed cost of the HVDC line. For reactive and power control and voltage control, if that is necessary in the system and the HVDC line is in the right place to provide those services, it's really the value of that is the avoided cost of traditional means of providing this kind of voltage support, so whether it's through STATCOMs, as we see asynchronous condensers. Lower long distance transfer losses, well, it's just the market value of the avoided losses of the transmitted energy. Smaller footprint, well, right of way does cost money to acquire, and risk associated with right of way permitting risks, of course, need to be considered as well. Various reliability benefits. If you can control contingencies better because HVDC lines are able to do so, you actually increase the transfer capability. You reduce the cost of contingencies, of contingency reserves, of avoided cost of AC equipment, like you might avoid STATCOMs or having to build more AC capability. Dynamic stability benefits, they can be addressed through conventional technologies like oscillation dampeners. If you don't need this conventional technology by virtue of using the HVDC capability, you have avoided costs there. If you can stabilize the underlying AC grid and eliminate stability constraints, you can calculate that with the nodal production cost models that might have proxy constraints in them to capture the existing stability constraints. And then, of course, black start capability, synthetic inertia. I mean, any of these values, it's really the avoided cost of providing the same grid services through conventional means. So that is basically the Swiss Army knife and how to value those other features. I want to put a call out to converting some AC lines to DC lines. There's a study from back in 2019 that says that HVDC conversions are a very technical feasible option that is often more cost effective than the available AC technologies. And in Germany, they're converting one circuit of a double circuit 380 kV line to DC. They don't have to modify the towers, they don't have to modify the conductors, they just need to exchange the insulators. But other than that, they have minimal costs other than the converter stations on either end to triple the throughput of that circuit. The planning frameworks, we don't really have a clear multi-value planning framework that would specifically consider HVDC capabilities. ENTSO-E does have one. They have a multi-value benefit cost analysis framework and a planning process that is not specifically focused on HVDC, but specifically addresses HVDC benefits and how they need to be considered in the overall planning framework. So their planning framework specifically considers the cost savings from optimal dispatch of the lines, the transient voltage and frequency stability benefits of HVDC line, black start services, voltage and reactive power. And if you look at ENTSO-E's 10-year plan that is based on scenario-based planning, looking out 10 to 30 years, there are a lot of lines being considered. And many of those lines are HVDC lines. Now, obviously, for submarine applications, HVDC has unique advantages. But I encourage you to look more closely at what Europe is doing in this regard. We also have examples stateside. CalISO has been a leader in considering HVDC solutions. They're the first one to host a VHC-based system, the Trans-Bay cable between the East Bay and San Francisco in North America. They have, in the more recent planning process, considered dozens of HVDC solutions and approved 2 multi-terminal VSC-based HVDC solutions because they resulted in better performance from the power flow perspective as a result of controllability. It also provided benefits in reducing local capacity requirements and overall greater or allowed for reduced reliance on local gas generation. So HVDC is being planned, but these are still the exceptions. How to do the technical studies for transmission planning? CalISO has a lot of experience with that already, but they continue to promote standard models and standardized approaches to evaluate these technologies. An example of the type of benefits that CalISO is considering in its transmission planning processes are really not just the long distance transfer benefits, the smaller right-of-way, and the ability to control flows, but also that you have certain advantages such as you don't need specific minimum short circuit levels, and you don't require reactive power support because the converter stations can provide that reactive power, and multi-terminal configurations for VSC is less complicated. It's great for delivering power to urban areas and systems with low short circuit levels. And some of these VSC-based converter stations are actually not that large, so they can be located more easily in tight places. And VSC, of course, is not the only capability. CalISO has looked at a combination of AC networks and HVDC solutions to create about 14,000 megawatts of offshore wind integration with a combination of these solutions. So to take advantage of HVDC, of course, it's not just a planning exercise. It also means that operationally, the system operators need to be able to take advantage of these capabilities. And as it turns out, CalISO has already implemented years ago modifications to its market designs, and New York is currently considering that. And what it means is that CalISO has updated its market engine so the market engine can co-optimize all controllable transmission devices with security constraint economic dispatch on the generation side. This is not something the other systems can currently do. New York ISO will soon have its own internal HVDC line, and they are implementing the optimization of internal controllable lines, both from an energy dispatch, but also from a capacity market perspective. And what I want to point out that in the West, we also have the Western Energy Imbalance Market and the soon to be implemented extended day-ahead market, or the EDA market. These markets will be able to fully co-optimize the dispatch of interregional HVDC lines because they're using the CAISO's market engine to do so. And on top of that, CAISO has recently approved by FERC its subscriber PTO framework, which is a framework that can automatically utilize any unscheduled merchant transmission capacity and optimize that into the market and compensate the merchant transmission owner for such market use and market optimization. Very exciting developments that we hope will spread to other system operators, particularly in the East, where many HVDC lines are being proposed by merchant developers. So where does that leave us? VSC converters are really the dominant technology that we need to take advantage of. We need multi-value planning to understand the benefits and understand the net cost of the transmission solutions. Interregional transmission is a great application for HVDC technology, but they're particularly beneficial in areas with weak grids, high renewable shares that require power to be transported to major load centers. But we need to gain hands-on experience, and the sooner we gain hands-on experience, the better we will be able to set ourselves up for the future. And for that, we need to develop grid codes that have interconnection standards that not only ensure that HVDC interconnections don't cause a reliability problem, but also allow us to benefit, to take advantage of the HVDC capability. So these grid codes need not to be defensive, they need to be enabling grid codes. We need to improve our planning tools. There's a lot of training that needs to happen at every level. Supply chain challenges are still problematic. European grid operators have committed to tens of billions of dollars in HVDC equipment orders. So if you were to order HVDC equipment today, you probably wouldn't get delivery until the early 2030s. But we need to standardize it. Right now, each of these lines is a one-off. We can really standardize to be able to link them together into multi-terminal configurations. And we need cost recovery, including for merchant lines, and there are quite a few models out there already, including that subscriber PTO proposal that CAISO is implementing. We need to make sure we can take advantage of the capabilities operationally, which means updates to market designs, and we need to get much better on how we use interregional transmission between system operators. Today, even the existing interregional transmission is poorly utilized, and we need to optimize how we utilize transmission that already exists across the seam so we can also fully utilize new transmission that we want to add. And that will require us to collaborate, not just with transmission owners and developers, but the HVDC equipment manufacturers, the reliability operators, industry groups, and of course, Department of Energy International Labs. So let me stop here and see where we are.
Wonderful, thank you, Johannes. We received quite a few questions, and we'll be able to get through maybe just one or two. Like we said before, we're hopeful that Johannes will be able to provide answers to these questions in written form, even after the webinar. So we got questions about the technology, questions about policy, about cost. So maybe let's start on the one that received the highest amount of votes. You mentioned 4 options that we could pursue to increase and get more movement around interregional planning. Which of those 4 do you think is most effective, or what combination of those? And part 2 of that question is, what do you expect and hope out of NERC's interregional transfer capability study? This is a study that was directed by Congress for NERC to do, and they should be done with it by the end of this year.
Yeah, no, I wish I knew what came out of what will come out of NERC's study. I would expect NERC would be more focused on the resilience benefit of interregional transmission, and where we may not have interregional transmission to address certain, say, winter storm challenges and so on. NERC is not doing economic transmission planning, so I would not expect a multi-value study that says this is the lowest cost solution to address the clean energy transition. So I would think the NERC study will be mostly focused on interregional reliability needs, and I'm not sure that we will see a concise number saying, you need to have at least 20% interregional transfer capability as your share of load or something like that. What is the most efficient way to get us there? I think we need to recognize the value of interregional transmission. I once was told by a person in charge of regional transmission planning at an ISO that the reason why we don't build interregional transmission is because there's no need for interregional transmission. Narrowly defined, an ISO can address its own reliability needs. So an interregional transmission is just an optional thing. I think unless we do the kind of multi-value planning to understand not just the reliability benefits, but also the economic benefit of interregional transmission to reduce customer cost, to reduce the cost of ensuring reliability, to diversify supply over a larger geographic footprint that exceeds the size of large weather systems. I think we will need to have some planning. If the system operators got together and created an institution like ENTSO-E in Europe that can actually do this kind of planning, and that then can approve transmission projects through a sort of consensus process, that would be a efficient solution. But I don't know how we can get there because we don't have an entity that could logically do that.
Thanks, Johannes. So going off of that and talking about entities, one of the big considerations with transmission planning is cost allocation. And so one of the questions here is talking about if states and RTOs cannot agree on cost allocation for these types of projects, what entity exists that can help with that? How do we go about allocating these costs for these types of projects?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. The first thing that is very important is you have to figure out what is the least cost, most highest value solution that reduces customer costs. Often we put the cart in front of the horse by starting to talk about cost allocations before we even know what the solution might be. What we've proposed in our interregional transmission planning roadmap is that any cost allocation needs to come after we develop a sound understanding of what the benefits are. you might have a situation where an interregional project provides reliability benefits to one solution, but economic benefit to one region, but economic benefit to the other region. We need to, for cost allocation for large interregional projects, we basically need to understand how each region benefits from that project and how that project is a lower cost solution than what each region could achieve through, solely regionally focused solutions. It's much easier to agree on cost allocation once you show people that this solution is reducing the costs. Once you show that you have a lower cost outcome, cost allocation is easier. If we just look at transmission as just adding to everyone's costs, then everyone will have an incentive to minimize the costs that they're being allocated. If a transmission project creates cost savings that exceed the value or the cost of the project, then you inverse that instinct by saying, yes, we want those benefits and we're willing to pay for the project. In some ways, you'd have to do a little bit like what MISO is doing with its multi-value project, where they show each MISO region that they benefit, or the benefits and cost savings that they get from the multi-value projects exceed their allocated costs. Long answer, but I encourage you to look at the roadmap. We try to lay that out with some case studies on where cost allocations have actually succeeded once the neighboring regions understand the nature of those benefits.
All right, and that is 2 of the 25 questions that we received. So likely not be able to cover those. It is nearly the top of the hour here. So I think we'll go ahead and start wrapping things up. And we'll follow up with answers to some of these questions. And these are really good questions. I think if we're able to get answers to that would really move the conversation forward. So thank you so much, Johannes. This has been extremely informative, and I hope that everyone on the webinar has found something that they can take home with them. I think it has answered as many questions as it has opened people to think about different areas that we should be thinking about and exploring as we consider interregional transmission, in particular how HVDC can be a factor in helping with that. We really do appreciate all your engagement today on the webinar. And we look forward to seeing you again at future webinars. But immediately, we're hoping that you will make it to Tucson next week for our spring technical workshop. Further information on all those webinars, our meetings can be found on our website, esig.energy. And once again, Johannes, thank you so very much for taking the time to be with us today. Again, really informative discussion that you had today. So thank you. I wish you all a good evening, if evening is what comes next for you here. Thank you.
Thank you all.